Another week, another topic. This time, training principles, training concepts, or more precisely, how to master and understand the difference between strength training, training for hypertrophy, and what is the difference, and maybe also training for fat loss. There might be some differences in all of that. Because there are a lot of social media presence of, hey, you need to train like this, you need to train like that, without ever explaining what's where, how. And I would go as far as explaining at what age you can do what, because as we know, sarcopenia and whatever at certain age kicks in, so you need to start eating slightly differently, and you might even not benefit from doing what you did when you were 16 years old at age of 45. So
absolutely.
Let's open up with that. What are actual benefits from strength training? And then dwell into what is the difference, key concepts, maybe some things that people need to take in consideration into understanding what they're trying to do. I often hear this term, power building. And you're like, so you're wasting time and not trying to get any benefit from your training then. But at the same time, you can do that if you're not serious about getting both at optimal level, so to speak. I personally like three things throughout the year, but it just depends on what's your mindset, what you're actually trying to achieve.
Yeah, that I agree with that. Like power building, at least how most people think of it, is not really a thing that most people that are interested in, I want to look a little bit better and have a little bit more muscle, should be doing. It's just, it exposes you to more risk than it's worth, and not as much progress that it's worth for most people. Most people that advocate power building are power lifters or bodybuilders, and that's what they're doing because they're bored. I mean, it's just really kind of the easiest way to say it. They're bored. All they do is go to the gym, and that's their life. So why not?
I would go as far as push that more often than not, those who advocate this kind of power building approach are up to eyeballs with drugs. So they might get away with that kind of approach because anything works then.
Absolutely. I mean, I've been there. I mean, there's versions of time where I've done a similar concept of like, hey, I'm just going to go in and hit a big lift. And then after that, I'm going to do a whole bunch of accessory work. I mean, that's essentially the description of power building, right? Like you're going to have the big 3 or big 4, right? You'll throw in the overhead press if you like overhead pressing, and you'll go in one day and you'll overhead press, deadlift, squat, or bench, or something, one of the big 4, pretty heavy, low reps. And then the rest of the workout is just accessories. I mean, that's not a boring concept, but it's time consuming, right? It's very time consuming for what you're getting out of it, because you're not really amplifying strength to the maximum, and you're, losing a little bit of steam when it comes to being able to accurately if you're new, you're going to have some trouble, like really pushing yourself in the hypertrophy aspect of things. So what kind of
key principles for strength training?
Yeah. So number one is going to be tension on the muscle, right? Like that's number one, right? If the muscles don't have the muscles you want to grow don't have tension on them, or the muscles that you're trying to activate, the motor pattern that you're trying to activate, if the tension is incorrect, then you're essentially not doing what you think you're doing. It's really that simple. That's like number one. You're not feeling the tension in the muscle groups, because let's put it this way. Let's talk something very practical, like a bicep curl, right? If you are tucking it up, right, and you're getting a lot of tension on your shoulder here, well, your shoulder, your front delt is doing most of the work, not the bicep. Now, should there be some there? Sure, especially if you have it fully stretched. But the bicep is hard to mess up because it's only a single joint exercise, right? Now let's talk about hamstrings, right? Hamstrings is like, okay, you can work the hamstring from hip flexion or knee flexion, and different parts of the like hamstrings are one of those ones where when you really learn to work your hamstring, you quickly realize that you can activate the lower part of your hamstring, the upper part of your hamstring, the outer part of the hamstring, the inner part of the hamstring, depending on how you move around. So if you are actively trying to make your hamstring thicker, well, then you're going to need to do, thicker as in wider. Then you're going to need to do, Cossack squats, split squats, things that activate outer and inner heads in and out, right? Versus just squats and leg curls, right? If you're trying to make it thicker in the respect of like vertically further away from the bone, towards the back, you're trying to make it thicker that way. Well, then now leg curls, both laying and sitting, now become way more valuable, right? If you're trying to activate it for athletic performance, well, now you need something like a Nordic curl, right? Because athletic performance, the hamstring in athletic performance is a break. Essentially, it's like a rebound type of muscle where you're using it to break and turn and be explosive. So you have to train it slightly different. These are all concepts you have to understand in order to program correctly, right? I train my hamstrings a lot. Why am I tearing my hamstring? Well, how are you training them, right? Like, that's a problem. If you're not eccentrically loading them with like Nordic curls or GHRs, well, guess what? You're not teaching the hamstring the attribute that you want in your athletic endeavor if you're some kind of a field athlete or just somebody who likes to play a pickup game of basketball or something like that, right? But, if you're a bodybuilder, you don't care about those things. Do these other things, right? Because Nordic curls and GHRs are not going to grow a huge hamstring, but they're going to teach it to catch load and transfer load to the rest of the body very well. Great for athletes, not so good for building a big hamstring, right? There are concepts like these that people don't understand. Today, I don't think we want to dive into the details of exercise selection.
I do believe what you just said is extremely important to understand, that this is why if you're a bodybuilder, don't try to be heroic and go and play rugby just because you're big now. Your body's not built for that.
Yeah, and you haven't trained the hamstring to handle that type of load with your new body weight, right? Like it's a no-brainer. It's really, when you start to understand.
Well, it is if you understand the basics, but a lot of people, they just think, oh, you're going to the gym, you must be really fit and so on. Especially when they see someone lean, and those lean people most likely are the weakest and most unfit there.
Yeah. So I don't think we'll dive too much. I just wanted to elucidate that, hey, the exercises you pick, how you train the muscle matters. Okay. So people know it's not just about do whatever you want. It's also, what do you want out of those muscles and how do you train to get that outcome? The other thing that I think that we can dive into deeper in this is the overall training concept, as far as rest periods, as far as how big the set should be, low rep range, high rep range, that sort of stuff, maybe a little bit of like nutrition around training, that sort of stuff. I think the easiest way to elucidate this will be from the concept of strength training versus hypertrophy training, right? Like, you want to be as strong as you can for your body weight versus I just want to get bigger and I don't care how strong I am, right? Like, I want bigger muscles.
Before you dwell into that, what are the true benefits from just being strong? Is there really need to chase strength?
Yeah. So let's put it this way. There is a base level of strength that I think everybody should have, but it's pretty low, right? Like, actually, I think the Russians nailed this pretty damn good. A Turkish get up, right? If you are not strong enough to get off the ground without using all four limbs, you're not strong enough, period, right? But that's a low bar, right? But there's a lot of people that can't do that. There's a lot of people that cannot get off the ground without using all four limbs, right? They need both hands and they need both legs to be able to get off the ground. That's a problem, right? You should be able to get off the ground with 3 limbs without a problem at any point in time. If you want to be really strong, you should be able to get off the ground with just 2 limbs, okay? That's more advanced, but I mean, if you're aiming for excellence, that's honestly, that's the easiest form of strength. What is that? Why do I say that particular metric? The reason is because that's the benefit of being strong. The benefit of being strong is you can transfer load all across the body at any point in time to potentially save you from a fall, so you don't break your hip when you get older, potentially be able to save another person that you might be with, from danger. All in any of those situations, you have to learn to transfer load your body to the other side of your body, right? That's why the
improving quality of life, essentially. So if you're just big,
absolutely,
and you can't do these basic things, that's when you blow your back out by sneezing and tying your shoes out.
Yeah, or you bend over to pick up somebody's kid or your kid, and you slip a disc. Like, okay, well, that shouldn't happen. That's not a thing that should be happening.
Yeah.
And that's a problem, right? So yeah, it is quality of life and insurance. And again, that's exactly what you just said. Just getting big muscles could be a detriment to that test, right? Like if all of a sudden you gain 20 kilos and now you go do a Turkish get up test and you can't get off the ground, that's a problem, right? You did shit wrong. You did something wrong as far as preparing you for being anti-fragile, right? And then in reverse, right? You could be so strong that you can pull a muscle just from sprinting down the street, right? There are pros and cons to being really strong and really big. And there's always a bell curve. So just continually getting bigger, not good. Just continually getting stronger, not good. For the normal.
And I'm glad you just said that, because I often advocate to people is like, when they are telling me, oh, you should be able to do this, like, yeah, I can, but why should I do that? There's only so strong I need to be. And I already know for someone my size, I'm not like elite powerlifting strong, but I'm too strong anyway. So I need to actually be careful, because my mentality is let's go balls to the wall, so to speak. But I know I can injure myself. So you always hold back big time.
Yeah, absolutely. And that actually brings up a key concept. Do you need to be able to take your muscle to absolute failure to the point where you might tear something to grow it? The answer is no. Okay, that actually leads perfectly into what I was going to explain about the differences between strength training and hypertrophy training. Okay, so let's define the term a little bit. Hypertrophy. That just means making it bigger. That's all that means, right? It doesn't mean making it stronger. It doesn't mean shaping it. It just means making it bigger, right? So here's a key concept. What makes a muscle, what makes up a muscle, right? There's obviously the muscle tissue, right? But that's actually not that much, right? Compare a piece of jerky to a steak, right? A piece of jerky is just the muscle. There's no water. There's very little electrolytes in there. There's no glycogen in there. And it's a very tiny piece, right? It starts like a really big piece and it gets really, really small when you finally get all that stuff out of it. That's the muscle tissue. It's not the tissue that makes the muscle big. It's everything else. It's the water. It's the glycogen. It's the sodium. It's all of those other things that make the muscle bigger. So right away you go, okay, so those things, glycogen, water, electrolytes, all of those things aren't really muscle tissue. They're not solid objects as far as like part of the body. They're just things that are local in that muscle to help it do work, right? So in that concept, think of it like everything that I just described as the gas tank. It's the gas tank for the muscle locally, okay? So how do you make it bigger exponentially quickly? Because the gas tank, your body's able to make bigger gas tanks very quickly, much more quickly than the actual muscle tissue. So you go with the concept of glycolytic type training, glycogen flexing, right? What does that mean? It just means that you're actively depleting the glycogen, the water, the sodium, the electrolytes in that local muscle tissue as quickly as possible every time you go in and train. Why would you want to do that? Because when you deplete it very quickly, your body has enzymatic reactions. They go, holy shit, we don't have very much gas in that tank anymore. We better fill it back up. And then it prepares for future onslaughts if you're doing this, fairly regularly, and it starts to make the gas tank bigger, right? So think of it this way. Water, sodium brings water. Glycogen brings water. So each molecule of glycogen brings water and sodium with it. So now you can measure it. You can actually probably weigh that, right? You can weigh it as, hey, there's several grams of stuff in the muscle tissue now, whereas the actual muscle fiber is micrograms, right? Very tiny measurement. So when you start training in this matter, you're moving grams of stuff. This is how somebody that's very lean can eat a bunch of carbs and wake up almost 3 kilos bigger if they're a small person. If they're a large person, they might wake up 8 kilos bigger overnight. Why? Because their body took a bunch of glycogen, and the glycogen brought water, and the water brought sodium and potassium and all the electrolytes, put it in the muscles. They have nice, big, round muscle bellies, and now they weigh almost 8 kilos bigger if they're a 100-kilo person, right?
And they still look leaner.
and look leaner. Yeah, because now the muscle is pushing out against the really thin skin that they have because they lean down. Right. This is the concept that I'm talking about. So how do you set up a training to maximize hypertrophy? You go in. What dictates using glycogen in the local muscle tissue versus other substrates? Oxygen does. Oxygen dictates that. You want to actively keep the muscle that you're trying to grow oxygen depleted for as long as possible while still doing a lot of work so that you can burn through as much glycogen in that muscle tissue as quickly as possible. And you can even accelerate the process by almost like pre-depleting the muscle tissue. So here's a quick thing, and I know that you like to do this too, is say you're training legs. So before the leg training, you do a little warm-up, and the warm-up is basically just, hey, let's do some hopping, let's do some jumping, let's activate the legs, and keep the breathing nasal only so that you're not having full recovery of oxygen in the active tissues that you're working, right? So you're getting glycolysis rolling in the tissues that you're going to work. And then you go to just a leg press machine. I would go with a leg press machine or a hack squat, and you actively do like 1.5 rep sets, right? So like all the way down, halfway up, all the way back down, come all the way up, all the way. Now you've actually have longer time with those muscles in tension. When a muscle is in tension, you're strangling it. Okay. There's no blood flow into the muscle. The longer you can keep that muscle in tension, the more it gets strangled. Now, here's where people mess up. They do a set of 1.5 rep hack squats. Let's just hypothetically say, but then they rest 5 minutes.
Yeah, because they need to set up tripods and whatnot. So
right. I'm like, no. You undid what you just did. If you're focusing on hypertrophy training, you do the set of 8, 10, or whatever, right? And your muscles your legs will basically give out. The reason is because you've depleted them of oxygen. You stripped them of local oxygen to the point where now they can't contract. When that happens, you can't contract. That's what you're going for. Then the moment that happens, you set a timer. 90 seconds or less, 60 seconds or less, and you're going to do it again. Yes, you are not going to be able to perform again the same way. People, and again, this is from a concept of you're trying to actively only grow the tissue. You're not trying to get stronger, right? Because people will be like, well, I can't do the same reps, or I can't, keep the same weight. I'm like, you're not supposed to. That's not the point of this training. This training is actively depleting the glycogen there and being as efficient as possible. You're probably only going to do 3 sets. If you're a real animal, you might get away with 4 sets, right? Of that style
and that's
of training.
a big distinction to make it, especially when I try to get someone, let's take stage ready, they will do exactly the same thing, but then they will time how long it takes. And next week they have to beat the time whilst keeping same load, not necessarily getting any stronger of any lifts. So instead of 120 minutes, you have to do it in 110. But do same exact loads, same exact reps, and just go for it until you get to like 45 minutes. You just run through it.
Yeah, because you're increasing, when you do it that way, you're not only increasing glycolytic efficiency, right? You're increasing how much glycogen is being depleted, how much fuel you're depleting in a shorter period of time. You're also increasing aerobic activity because that's how you're recovering between sets, right? Like if I all of a sudden tell you, hey, now you have to recover in 60 seconds instead of 2 minutes, your aerobic system is now going to be taxed in the shorter period of time, right? So it just goes hand in hand if you know what you're doing, because what's the other concept of like fat loss, right? This kind of dovetails in like, hey, training for fat loss. Well, you got to improve your aerobic efficiency. Like fat loss only happens when you oxidate fatty acids, right? How do you oxidate fatty acids? With oxygen. It's the only way you can do that. So if you're not increasing your oxygen carrying capacity or your aerobic capacity, guess what? You have a lower ability to oxidize fats. It's the only way you're going to burn fat to begin with. So if you're not focusing on that part, you're not training for fat loss either, right? Like a lot of people do not understand the concepts of what fat loss is versus what hypertrophy is versus what strength is, right? We kind of touched on hypertrophy, like, hey, you want to deplete glycogen, you want to restore glycogen. For fat loss, you want to actively be working the aerobic system so that you have a high aerobic capacity. Now, it doesn't have to be endurance athlete capacity, right? Like that's not what we're talking about, but you actively want to be training that system, not letting it get worse as you're trying to diet down and get leaner or recomposition your body.
You say this is
then,
lost because everyone is trying to chase progressive overload and all their focus is on lifting more. So they rest too long and then they end up like, yeah, I might as well just take drugs because nothing works. But in reality, they are just wasting a lot of time in a gym and they could have get away with just being more efficient and more mindful about not wasting those minutes in a gym. It really shouldn't be taken as long as some people spend.
Yeah, well, and too many people are sold the idea that progressive overload is the sole factor that grows muscle tissue. Don't get me wrong. That's why I said at the very beginning, tension has to happen. That means that you need to use a weight heavy enough to cause that tension in the muscle. Over time, I'm talking months, not weeks, that weight required to get that same amount of tension will go up. That's progressive overload, right? Just like you said, okay, your clients, hey, the aim is to get more work done in a shorter period of time, but I want you to use the same load. That's excellent, because the next time they go through that cycle, they're not going to use that same load. They're going to be a little bit stronger. They're going to use a slightly heavier load, but then they'll probably have to maintain that load for several weeks for sure, and maybe a month or two, right? But that's still progressive overload. People think that progressive overload is adding weight every week or every other week. That's not progressive overload. That's just a systemized way to progress strength. So they're confusing strength with hypertrophy. Again, so we're going to talk about it, right? If I want to get stronger, I have to add load to the bar. I have to dial in my technique to be more efficient, to move the same path with more weight, right? Think about what I just said. I'm becoming more efficient at moving more load week by week. That's counterproductive to hypertrophy.
Yeah, and that's something people don't kind of come to terms that oftentimes to get stronger, you actually need to pull back on how much load you use as well, just to polish up your technique, which means you're not going to become more efficient or anything because you're using light loads now and whatnot, and then you can progress again. This is something I fight with a lot of people. They're like, why are you maxing out every single workout? You're just making yourself weaker.
Yeah, because it's not placing you in an optimum place to dial in your technique, your motor efficiency for the motor pattern that you're training, right? That's why maximal load training is great for nervous system activation, right? The peaking of going into a competition, the last 6 weeks at most. Usually it's more like 3 or 4. But that's not what's making you stronger and stronger. That's not what's giving you the ability to handle a heavier load in the future. What it is make the load heavy enough that you can repeat that same exact pattern perfectly every time you step into the gym or do that particular exercise. That is strength training. That's the concept of, hey, next week or 2 weeks later, I'm going to add 5 pounds to the bar, right? Or 2.5 kilos. That's like perfect because you've systematically increased it just enough that it's a heavier load, but it's not so much that you now have to completely change your technique or you have to struggle with your technique at that point. The technique should be almost identical with a slightly heavier load. Too many people think that is hypertrophy training. That is not. That is strength training, right? And hypertrophy training is everything else that we've talked about. It's depleting glycogen. It's restoring glycogen. There's a little paradigm that I like to use with people that can use it, if their insulin resistance is correct and all of that type of stuff, which is, hey, we're going to go in and we're going to deplete a lot of muscle glycogen. So guess what? After training, we're going to use some things that replete glycogen as quickly as possible so that the very next day, we can do the same type of training again. So we're teaching the body to deplete the gas tank and make a bigger gas tank. Deplete the gas tank, make a bigger gas tank, right? That's what's going to grow bigger, fuller muscles, right? Some of that involves drugs, right? Some of that involves just a style of eating around training that it actively bumps up your glucose in your blood on purpose, right? There is times and places to do some of the things that people say are bad, right? Not always, just especially if it's like, let's put it this way, you're strength training and you're eating a whole crap ton of glucose all the time. That's not doing anything anymore because the training isn't dictating that you need a lot of glucose in the blood to restore glycogen in the muscles. On the other side,
and we still see a lot of people will do that. A lot of strength athletes now They will have a lot of carbs before training, then intra-workout drinks, post-workout drinks. And you go like, "Ooh, you probably have caused so much inflammation in your body now that you're just going to get weaker." So
yeah. I mean, it'll work for like a week or 2 or 3, and then they realize, oh, I'm all inflamed, and I need to take a week off, or I need to dial back my training. I'm like, well, maybe you shouldn't be causing that much inflammation in your training, right? Now I say it that way, and they go, okay, well, I'll change my training. I'm like, no. Change your diet, right? Change what you're doing while you're working out, because you don't need that much glycogen. I mean, what are you doing? 2 exercises, 3 exercises, all low reps. I'm like, yeah, there was a lot of
big
tension
rest in between, and
yeah. I'm like, what is the demand on your glycogen load? Your liver can handle that, no problem. I mean, there's endurance athletes that run for 2 hours straight, and their liver glycogen handles all of that, right? Like, it's not a concept that people fully understand of fuels used in certain modalities of training, right? And then when it comes to strength training, okay, so how do you program to not put on body fat while you're strength training and actively grow the tissue back as much as possible? It would be more on the, I'm not saying keto, I'm just saying you don't need as much glycogen, but you do need a lot more protein and healthy fats to go along in that diet, especially going into a training session, right? Going into a training session, strength training sessions are typically a little bit longer, and you start to lose focus and things of that nature when the local glycogen in the bloodstream is depleted. So how do you combat that? MCT oils are a great way to do that. You have a meal that you cooked in MCT oils or something along those lines, so that they fuel quickly, but they're also slow burning. They're still a fat, right? They're still a fat, and now you have more sustained energy for a 2-hour training session instead of a 1-hour training session, right? Things of that nature. Plenty of protein before and after. And then, if you really nailed that training really well, you have some carbs after, just to facilitate more amino acids, right? Because in a strength training program, you're actively depleting or damaging muscle tissue more than a hypertrophy specific training. So you need a lot more amino acids coming back into the bloodstream and into the local muscles. You can use an insulin spike after training to facilitate more of that happening, because when insulin comes up, more free amino acids will also get pulled into the tissues along with the glycogen, right? So you can use things like this to your advantage if you know what you're doing for the type of training that you're doing. So long story short, the type of training you're doing dictates how you should be eating around the training, not the other way around.
Yeah. And how does it change with age? Because we know with age, everything becomes a little bit, so to speak, harder and whatnot. But there are obviously a lot of outside factors that you've been exposed to different stresses for most extended period of time and whatnot. And also probably wouldn't be the smartest idea when you're like 65 to live on 1,000 grams of carbs a day. So what can be done there?
So it really depends on your environment that you're in and the environment that you've been exposed to as you've aged. I hate to say it that way, but that is the dictating factor, right? Like if you spent 30 years living at a high latitude and now you're trying to lose body fat, well, guess what? Your metabolism is turned down. It's turned down, especially if you live most of those 20 years working at a factory or working indoors or something. So these are concepts going back to all our previous episodes of mitochondrial health and how that dictates your metabolism more than what you've ate, more than how you've trained, by a long way. It's more like 80% of the equation. So as you get older, the determining factor that tells me what to do with your training or your nutrition is how and where have you aged. Okay, because that starts to tell me what kind of a program your mitochondria are running at the cellular level. And we have to undo that to closer to when you're 20 or 30 if we want to see real progress. It's just, that's the simple truth, right? Let's put it this way. If you're 50 years old, male or female, and you've been living at a high latitude and pretty much indoors for the last 15 to 20 years, I guarantee you are going to have to eat incredibly little calories to see a little bit of progress on fat loss. The reason is because you've programmed your mitochondria to be more energy efficient, essentially, because the mitochondria are getting a signal that there isn't very much sunlight. When there isn't very much sunlight, what does that tell biology? that there isn't a lot of energy to go around, period. That's what it's telling you. There isn't a lot of food that should be available. There isn't a lot of energy coming in from external sources. So the mitochondria literally dial themselves down to be energy efficient. What does that mean for food intake? It means when you eat food, more of it gets turned into fat because it's trying to be more food efficient, right? So now you're trying to diet at 50 years old. You're going to have to eat like a bird because your mitochondria are incredibly efficient. And it does that through lots of different ways. It'll turn down thyroid production. It will turn down sex hormone production. You see what I'm saying? Like all of the things that we've talked about in previous episodes of like, hey, the environment dictates a lot of these things. That's why I'm focused on that, because those things then come back to, I'm 50 years old and I want to lose weight. Okay, we looked at your blood work and you have suppressed thyroid. It's not flagged, but it's suppressed. Your sex hormones are suppressed. Your vitamin D doesn't really exist. Those are not like individual. Those are telling me all about your body and how your body has aged over the last 10 years or 15 years, right? And that's how it changes, right? So then it goes, okay, for training, if somebody's compromised like this, we focus on the basics. There will be a lot more walking outside for this person and eventually getting more fit in the aerobic sense, because what did I say about aerobic capacity? That's the thing that's going to dictate your fat, your ability to oxidize fat. So let's kill two birds with one stone. Let's start reversing the issues that you've caused over the last 10 years by getting you outside in the sunlight if possible, or in the cold. And let's start working on your aerobic capacity as much as possible. At the same time, we'll include some very basic, very efficient training to start to teach the body how to move glycogen around, how to deplete glycogen, how to bring glycogen back in. You start getting those systems back online. And then, it can take a while depending on how messed up you are, right? And then you start to see progress once those start to get fixed. Your aerobic capacity gets fixed, your glycolytic capacity gets fixed, your circadian rhythm gets fixed, because circadian rhythm is not just when you go to sleep and when you wake up. Your circadian rhythm is, can your body tell time accurately? Because time is how things are manufactured in your body. I mean, your body is a manufacturing plant of hormones and neurotransmitters. It has to know the time of day, just like a factory in real life has to know what time it is so that they can start certain processes and stop certain processes. It's not a big concept that's like a black hole. You just have to think about it. What is your body doing naturally? It's creating things. Okay, how do you create things? You need to know time. Time is number one thing that you need to know if you need to create things, because certain things need to come in at certain times, certain things need to be processed in a certain way, and then repeated in a cyclical manner, right? That is manufacturing 101.
Yeah, and just this morning I read a study about, hey, if you train at the same time, your body is more efficient at being whatever the hell you train. I'm like, it's just common sense. Yeah, and when people come to me and say, a lot, I'm aging now, everything is much harder. And I usually ask them, yeah, but are you doing what you did when you were at your best? Let's say when you were 17. Do you still go out with your friends and kick ball after school, so to speak? Like, she's like, right. As they look at me weird, I'm like, you don't live like you were living. This is why you don't have that energy. There's nothing to do with your age. It's to do with what you're doing outside of it.
Yeah, it's your environment. Your environment dictates incredible amounts of information for your body. In fact, it's the key thing that makes things work or not work or work differently, right? You can do the same exercise plan, but if your environment is different, let's just think summer versus winter, you're going to have a different result. It's unequivocal. You can eat the same, train the same. If you do it in the summer versus do it in the winter, it will be different.
So what would be your general advice for somebody who's trying to improve their physical appearance and energy levels? What would be something to focus on and start with? If people want to look at proper things, they obviously can go on video number 1, do your goddamn blood test and understand where you are. But for somebody who has a baseline, they are healthy, they don't have any insulin resistance or anything like that needs to be addressing. So they just want to build a little bit more muscle mass and burn body fat a bit more efficiently than they have done so far. What would be a training style they should approach first? Should they focus on strength training, hypertrophy training, cardiovascular improvement, or is there anything that you would say, you know what, let's do this for the next 6 weeks, and that's going to improve your ability to look better?
Yeah. Now I'm going to go off of exactly what you said. Their blood work comes back clean. They're healthy. They don't have any insulin resistance. None of their hormones are suppressed, including their thyroid, right? Like basically a perfect person, right? In that case, it's very simple. Glycolytic training for your hypertrophy. Make it efficient, make it aggressive, short rest periods. Okay. Do it with that style of training. You should be able to train almost every day, Monday through Friday, right? Do a body part split, use machines, use things that require very low skill. You can put a lot of tension on your target muscles and do large sets, 45 seconds of work.
Low risk, high intensity.
Yeah. Yeah. Low risk, high intensity, large amounts of work, 45 seconds of work, very short rest, something like 60 to 90 seconds. Keep it aggressive, right? And try to get more work done. That's the concept that you said, hey, this workout on day one took me 120 minutes. By next week, I want to cut down by 10 minutes, etc. And you just start chipping away at that. That kind of nails hypertrophy training for somebody that's healthy like this. We're trying to improve glycolytic capacity, glycolytic efficiency. And then for eating around that, kind of go into concepts of like, hey, I'm going to put most of my carbohydrates that I'm allowing for my diet around the training session, a little bit before, the majority after. Okay. And then from a fat loss, right? Because that's for bringing in hypertrophy, getting a little bit more muscle, for improving body composition and fat loss. Then I would start doing exactly what I'm doing here, getting a lot of sunlight in the morning, and preferably, if you can, doing all of your aerobic training outside at any point in time. So the morning daylight is crucial for signaling the right cascades for the rest of the day. And then outside aerobic training of any kind. You can run, you can jog, you can bike, etc. You can take your rower or your assault bike and put it outside. Do your aerobic training outside, because that will dramatically improve your aerobic capacity, doing aerobic work outside. It's a little hack. You're doing the same level of work, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, whatever it is, and you're improving it by doing outside. So now you start improving aerobic efficiency so that you can oxidize body fat when you're at rest, right? So those two concepts are the things that you need to lean into to really improve fat burning ability and bringing in bigger muscles.
So basically, stop messing about in the gym, stop chatting around with people, and do that at the end of training sessions, which I used to train at Gary Lister's gym. Not many people will probably know him anymore, but one of the most decorated bodybuilders in UK history for bodybuilding. And there was always a rule. You train, and then at the end, you sit on a table and talk whilst you're training. And the chatter was, come on, you got a couple more reps. That was it. So it was quite intense, and everyone was looking great when you trained at the time when he was in there. Whereas now it seems like people are lost in progressive overload world, because all they think, hey, if I added a couple pounds to this barbell, I'm going to grow quicker. But in reality, you can probably save yourself a bit of time by just making sure that you're doing the job you're supposed to do there. If you're training for hypertrophy, you just need to be there and work quick. Dorian Yates, he is notoriously known for having his workouts extremely short, even though he was training like an animal. And when you look at any other, the best bodybuilders out there, they don't spend much time chatting and walking around and doing God knows what else. Learn from the best if you want to come even near that potential that they have put out there is possible. And don't confuse strength training with hypertrophy training and vice versa. If you're doing strength training, do your strength training and maybe have a block of hypertrophy later on. And baseline for all of it should always be, are you even fit enough to train?
Yes, absolutely. That's literally what a lot of people miss. They're like, oh, I'm going to start weight training. Are you fit enough to weight train? Are you fit enough to actually cause the damage that you need to cause and recover from it? That is a concept everybody skips. I'm glad you brought that up. You have to be fit enough first.
And I see a lot. I've seen before where people go like, oh, I'm just so tired. I'm like, go for a walk. Oh no, I'm gonna sleep in today and then I'm gonna train tomorrow. I'm like, this is why you're not getting results that this other guy gets, because he spent all day putting a roof on of his house. He's very fit and he's eating and whatnot. And then he goes in gyms and crushes it, and he grows quicker than you do, because you're wasting so much potential of getting better by being bought into this concept, I'm going to do too much. And you're like, then look on Arnold. He was training 6-7 hours a day, and he was a bricklayer. And he was way above everyone else. He was just biggest, baddest the person out there. And there wasn't even so much drugs involved as there are now. And he could potentially, if someone like him would compete now, he would still blow people's heads off, because it's like 23-inch biceps. You don't even see that now. It's crazy.
Yeah. No, you're 100% right. But yeah, for sure, the concept that a lot of people miss is, are you fit enough to begin with? And if not, that's where these concepts that we've talked about are incredibly valuable, right? The scenario that we talked about before this was, you have clean blood work and you're perfectly fine, right? That is oftentimes not the case. And that's where I'm saying, are you fit enough, right? Is your circadian rhythm,
lot, don't we? And we see it more often than not now, especially that.
Yeah, because being fit enough is not, can you actually execute the exercise? Being fit enough is, you executed your exercise, but you're going to be able to recover from it. Well, if your thyroid production is suppressed, you're not recovering from anything, because all metabolism is now lower. If your sex hormones are suppressed, you're not fit enough to recover from said weight training. If your glucose tolerance is poor, you're not fit enough to oxidize body fat, right? That's what I'm saying. Are you fit enough is actually a real question that needs to be assessed before you even start doing a weight training program and aerobic training program. You need to start getting that stuff in line, right? That doesn't mean you can't do it as you go, but the priority of what you should be focusing on and not skipping, which is what you alluded to when the guy says, I'm tired and I'm just going to sleep in. No. The priority is, you're probably not fit enough. You should get your ass up, get some daylight in the morning, go for a 30-minute walk. And then if you want to go back to sleep, I'm fine with that, because you already entrained some key concepts to start becoming fit enough, right? That's, I'm sure that's what you alluded to.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Dave, thanks for your time as usual. This has been really good and insightful, and there are obviously some practical things that people can implement straight away. And I'll speak to you next video.
Awesome. Thank you.